The basement of Carnegie Hall smelled like wood polish and old leather. It was a Wednesday afternoon. The woman sitting on the floor beside a grand piano had her toolbox open, adjusting the tension on the middle strings. Her name was Helen, and she'd been tuning pianos for almost 30 years now. She worked quickly, her fingers moving with the kind of confidence that comes from doing the same thing thousands of times. The hammer hit the string. She listened, made a tiny adjustment, and moved to the next note. It was quiet work, the kind most people never think about. When you go to a concert and hear beautiful music, nobody wonders who made sure the piano was ready. That was Helen's job, and she was good at it. The concert hall had 3 main pianos, and she took care of all of them. She knew their personalities like old friends. This one, the Steinway in front of her, had a bright sound in the upper register. The Baldwin upstairs was warmer. The Bessinderfer in the practice room had the deepest bass notes she'd ever heard. She'd regulated them, voiced them, and kept them ready for whoever needed to play. Helen was 52 years old. She lived in a small apartment in Queens with her younger sister, who worked as a nurse. Her days were predictable. She'd take the subway into Manhattan, spend her time in basements and backstage areas, tune the pianos, and go home. It was a good life. Quiet, but good. What most people didn't know was that Helen had once dreamed of being the person on stage, not the person in the basement. She finished with the middle section and moved to the bass notes. As she worked, she couldn't help herself. She played a few chords, just to test the sound. Then a few more. Before she knew it, her hands were moving through a piece she hadn't played in years. Rachmaninoff. The melody filled the empty basement, echoing off the concrete walls. She stopped herself. This wasn't why she was here. She had work to do. I didn't know you could play like that. Helen jumped. She turned to see one of the stagehands standing in the doorway. He was a young guy, maybe 25, always friendly. Just testing the sound, Helen said, closing the piano lid quickly. That didn't sound like testing. That sounded like the real deal. She shrugged and went back to packing up her tools. A long time ago, maybe. The stagehand lingered for a moment, like he wanted to say something else. But then his radio crackled. He waved and headed back upstairs. Helen finished her work and was gathering her things when she heard footsteps rushing down the stairs. Heavy, urgent footsteps. The hall manager appeared, a thin man in his 60s with reading glasses hanging from a chain around his neck. His face was pale. "Helen, thank God you're still here." She stood up, concerned. "What's wrong?" "It's Volkov. He's sick. Food poisoning, they think. He's at the hospital right now." Dmitry Volkov was scheduled to perform that evening. The show was sold out. People had paid hundreds of dollars for tickets. Some had traveled from other states. "That's terrible," Helen said. "Is he going to be okay?" "The doctors say yes, but he definitely can't perform tonight. We've been calling everyone we can think of. Every pianist in the city is either already booked or out of town. We're 2 hours away from curtain, and we have 800 people coming through those doors." Helen nodded sympathetically. She'd seen emergencies before. Concerts got canceled sometimes. It was part of the business. The manager looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Jimmy said he heard you playing down here. He said you were really good." Helen felt her stomach drop. "Oh, no. I just tune pianos. I don't perform, but you can play? I mean, I learned years ago, but that was a lifetime ago. I haven't performed in front of people since I was in my 20s. The manager stepped closer. His voice was desperate now. "Helen, I've worked in this hall for 40 years. I've never had to cancel a show because we couldn't find a performer. Not once. We have critics coming tonight. We have board members. We have people who saved up for months to buy tickets. I understand, but I can't. I'm not a concert pianist. I'm a technician. What were you playing just now? When Jimmy heard you?" She hesitated. "Rachmaninoff. Piano Concerto No. 2. His eyes widened. "That's what Volkov was supposed to play tonight." "That's just a coincidence. I used to practice that piece a long time ago. It doesn't mean anything." The manager pulled up a chair and sat down, his shoulders sagging. He looked exhausted. "Can I ask you something? Why did you stop performing?" Helen didn't want to talk about it. She never talked about it. But something about the way he asked made her answer honestly. I was at Juilliard. This was 25 years ago. I was preparing for my senior recital, and my father died. Heart attack. Just like that, he was gone. My mother had passed when I was a kid, so it was just me and my two younger siblings. Somebody had to take care of them. Somebody had to pay the bills. I left school and started working. Piano tuning paid better than teaching, and there was always work. My brother and sister needed me more than I needed to be on stage. The manager was quiet for a moment. Where are they now? Your siblings? My brother's a lawyer in Boston. My sister's a nurse. She lives with me. They both did well because you gave up your dream for them. Helen shook her head. I didn't give up anything. I made a choice. They needed me, and now? Now what? Now, they're grown. They're successful. When was the last time you played for yourself? Not to test a piano? Really played? She didn't have an answer. The manager stood up and walked to the piano. He opened the lid she'd just closed. You know this instrument better than anyone alive. You regulated it yourself last week. You know exactly how it responds, what it can do. And you know the piece by heart. I can't. My hands aren't the same. I work with tools all day. I have calluses. Real pianists practice for hours every day. I haven't done that in decades. Then we'll cancel, he said quietly. I'll go upstairs right now and make the announcement. 800 disappointed people will go home. Some of them will understand. Some of them won't. The critics will write about it. The board will ask questions. But it's fine. We'll survive. He started walking toward the stairs. Wait, Helen heard herself say. He turned back. If I did this, and I'm not saying I will, but if I did, what would happen if I mess up? What if I forget the notes? What if my hands can't keep up? The manager smiled for the first time. Then at least we tried. Look, I've heard thousands of performances in this hall. The technical perfection isn't what people remember. It's the feeling. It's the heart. And something tells me you've got plenty of that. Helen looked at the piano. She thought about all the years she'd spent making sure other people could share their music. She thought about her father, who used to sit in the back row of her recitals with the biggest smile on his face. She thought about the girl she used to be before life got complicated. 2 hours? She asked. 2 hours? She took a deep breath. I'll need the practice room. And I need you to not tell anyone who I am until the last possible minute. If I change my mind, I don't want people to know I chickened out. The manager nodded. Done. Whatever you need. As he hurried back upstairs to start making arrangements, Helen sat down at the piano bench. Her hands were shaking. She placed them on the keys and closed her eyes. She had 2 hours to remember who she used to be. The practice room was smaller than Helen remembered. She'd been in this space countless times to tune the upright piano in the corner, but she'd never actually used it to practice. That felt like someone else's privilege, not hers. She sat at the bench and stared at the keys. Her hands were still shaking 1 hour and 45 minutes until showtime. She started with scales just to warm up. C major, up and down. Her fingers felt stiff at first, clumsy. But slowly, muscle memory kicked in. The patterns were still there, buried under years of different work. Her hands remembered even if her mind was screaming that this was crazy. After 10 minutes of scales, she moved to the piece itself. Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2. It started quietly, with the piano alone. Deep, rolling chords that built slowly into something powerful. The first few measures came easily. She'd played this opening so many times in her youth that her hands moved almost automatically. But then, she hit a passage in the second page and stopped. Her fingers tangled. She'd forgotten the notes. Helen felt panic rising in her chest. She tried again. Same spot, same mistake. She closed her eyes and took a breath.
Right.
I'm some son of you. The way the strings would come in, the way the melody would shift. She tried to feel her way through it instead of thinking so hard. This time, her hands found the right notes. She kept going, working through the first movement. Some sections flowed perfectly. Others required her to stop and figure them out again. It was like finding her way through a house she used to live in, now changed after years away. The layout was familiar, but some doors opened differently than she remembered. 20-5 years. That's how long it had been since she'd really played this piece. She'd been 27 years old, a student with everything ahead of her. The week before her father died, she'd been practicing this concerto for hours every day, preparing for her senior recital. She was going to play it with the student orchestra. It was supposed to be her moment. Then the phone call came. Her father had collapsed at work. By the time she got to the hospital, he was gone. Everything changed after that. Her brother was only 15. Her sister was 12. There was no one else. Her father's life insurance helped, but it wasn't enough to cover everything. Someone had to work. Someone had to be the adult. Helen had made the decision quickly. She withdrew from Juilliard, found a job as an assistant piano technician, and learned the trade. The pay was decent. The work was steady. She could support her siblings and keep a roof over their heads. She'd told herself it was temporary. Maybe in a few years, when things settled down, she'd go back to school. But a few years turned into 5, then 10. Her brother went to college. Her sister followed. Helen kept tuning pianos and paying bills. The dream of performing got smaller and smaller until it felt like something from another life entirely. Now, sitting in this practice room, all those old feelings came rushing back. The nervousness before a performance, the excitement of bringing music to life, the fear of not being good enough. Her hands moved through the second movement now, the slower section. This part had always been her favorite. It was gentle, almost like a lullaby. When she played it as a student, she used to think about her mother, who died when Helen was 8. Her mother used to sing to her at bedtime. This movement had that same tender quality as she played. Helen realized something. Her hands weren't the same as they used to be. They were stronger from years of physical work. More calloused, yes, but also more capable. There was a different kind of power in them now. She finished the movement and checked the clock. 1 hour until curtain. Her phone buzzed. A text from her sister. Just heard from the hall manager. Are you insane? Call me. Helen smiled despite her nerves. The manager must have tracked down her emergency contact. She texted back, probably insane. Talk later. Wish me luck. The response came immediately. We're coming. Don't you dare start without us. Helen's eyes stung with sudden tears. She put the phone away and went back to the piano. The third movement was the hardest. Fast, technically demanding, full of runs and jumps that required precision. This was where she was most likely to fall apart. Her fingers felt rusty on the quick passages. She worked through them slowly at first, then gradually increased the tempo. Some parts felt impossible. Her hands weren't as nimble as they used to be. But she pushed through, making note of the tricky spots. She'd have to be extra careful there during the performance. If she actually went through with this, she could still back out. The manager had said so. They'd cancel the show, and life would go back to normal. She'd go home to her apartment, heat up some dinner, and watch television with her sister. Tomorrow, she'd come back to the hall and tune pianos, like always. No one would know. But something had shifted inside her when she started playing again. It felt like waking up after a long sleep. All these years she'd told herself she was content with her quiet life. And she was content, truly. But content wasn't the same as fulfilled. She'd spent 25 years making sure other people could share their gift with the world. She'd maintained their instruments, kept them in perfect condition, helped them sound their best. It was good work, important work. But when was the last time she'd allowed herself to be the artist instead of the technician? Helen worked through the entire concerto one more time, start to finish. It wasn't perfect. There were rough spots, places where she nearly stumbled. But she made it through. The bones were there. The feeling was there. 30 minutes until curtain. There was a knock on the door. The manager poked his head in. "How's it going?" "It's going," Helen said. "I'm not making any promises about how this will turn out. The orchestra's warming up. I told the conductor the situation. He's willing to work with you. He said, if you need to take any sections slower, just signal him." Helen nodded. Her mouth felt dry. "The audience is starting to arrive," the manager continued. "I'm going to make an announcement before you come out. I'll explain that Volkov is ill, and we have a substitute performer. I won't say anything else unless you want me to." "Don't tell them anything about me," Helen said. "Just say there's a replacement. That's all. You've got it." He paused at the door. "For what it's worth, I've been listening from the hallway. You sound wonderful." After he left, Helen sat alone with her thoughts. She thought about her father, who had always believed in her. He used to say she had a gift, that the world needed to hear her play. She wondered what he would think if he could. See her now. She thought about all the performers she'd worked with over the years. The nervous ones who paced backstage, the confident ones who treated her like furniture, the kind ones who learned her name and asked about her day. She'd watched them all walk onto that stage, and she'd wondered what it felt like to stand in that spotlight. Now, she was about to find out. Helen changed into the simple black dress she kept in her work locker for occasional formal events. She looked at herself in the bathroom mirror. She looked like herself, just Helen, a middle-aged woman with work-worn hands in gray starting to show in her dark hair. Not a concert pianist, just someone who loved music. Maybe that would have to be enough. She walked toward the stage entrance, her heart pounding so hard she thought everyone could hear it. The manager met her at the door. "They're ready for you. The orchestra is in place. The conductor is waiting. Are you ready?" Helen took one last deep breath. "As ready as I'll ever be? Then let's do this." He held open the door, and Helen could hear the murmur of 800 people on the other side. The stage manager held up 3 fingers. 3 minutes Helen stood in the wings, hidden by the heavy curtain. She could see a sliver of the audience through the gap. Rows and rows of people in elegant clothing. The concert hall was packed, every seat filled. The chandeliers above them sparkled like captured starlight. Her legs felt weak. Through the curtain, she heard the manager's voice over the sound system. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us tonight at Carnegie Hall." The crowd settled into an expectant silence. "I need to inform you of a last-minute change to this evening's program. Our scheduled performer, Dmitry Volkov, has fallen ill and will be unable to perform tonight." A wave of disappointed murmurs swept through the audience. Helen heard someone groan. She saw a couple near the front exchange annoyed glances. However, the manager continued, "We are fortunate to have secured a replacement pianist who will perform Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2 as planned. Please join me in welcoming tonight's performer." That was her cue. Helen's feet wouldn't move. For a terrible moment, she thought she might actually turn around and run back down the hallway. Back to the basement. Back to her normal life, where she was invisible and safe. But then she thought about her father's smile, her sister's text, the 25 years of quiet wondering about what might have been. She stepped onto the stage. The spotlight hit her like a physical force, bright and hot. She couldn't see past the first few rows. Beyond that, the audience disappeared into darkness. She was aware of hundreds of eyes on her, assessing her. The murmuring got louder. She could feel their confusion. This wasn't Dmitry Volkov, the celebrated Russian virtuoso who'd performed at the world's greatest concert halls. This was a woman they didn't recognize. A nobody. Helen walked to the piano, her shoes clicking on the polished wood floor. Each step felt like it took forever. She was intensely aware of everything. The temperature of the room. The smell of the wood polish she'd applied to this very stage 2 days ago. The rustling of programs as people checked to see if they'd missed something. She reached the piano bench and sat down. From here, she could see the orchestra behind her. 20 musicians watching her. The conductor, an older man with silver hair, gave her a small nod. His expression was kind but cautious. He was probably as nervous as she was. Helen adjusted the bench height. She turned the knob and raised it slightly. Better. She flexed her fingers, shook out her hands, stalling. In the audience, she heard whispers. Who is she? I've never heard of her. Is this some kind of joke? Someone in the back stood up. Then another person. They were leaving. Helen watched them shuffle toward the aisle, their faces tight with irritation. They'd paid good money for Volkov, not for some unknown substitute. More people started gathering their things. 5, 6, 7 people heading for the exits. Helen felt her face flush. She'd known this might happen. But seeing it, watching people literally walk out before she'd played a single note, hurt more than she'd expected. The conductor leaned forward slightly. Ready when you are? He whispered. His voice was gentle. He was trying to help her through this. Helen placed her hands on the keys. They were cold. Her hands were ice cold. She looked down at the keyboard. These were the same keys she'd adjusted just last week. She knew this piano intimately. Every small quirk, every subtle variation in tone. If there was any piano in the world she could trust, it was this one. The audience was still restless. More programs rustling. More whispers. Someone coughed. A phone buzzed and was quickly silenced. She heard the distant sound of the lobby doors closing as the people who'd left made their exit. The conductor raised his baton. This was it. The moment where everything would either come together or fall apart. Helen closed her eyes. She thought about why she'd fallen in love with music in the first place. It wasn't about impressing anyone. It wasn't about applause or recognition or proving she belonged on this stage. It was about the music itself. The way it could say things words couldn't. The way it could make you feel less alone. She took a breath and began to play. The opening was hers alone. No orchestra yet. Just the piano. Deep, resonant chords that rolled out into the concert hall like thunder in the distance. Her hands moved across the keys, and something amazing happened. They remembered. Not just the notes, but the feeling. The weight of each chord, the space between them, the way the melody needed to breathe. Her body remembered what her mind had been too afraid to trust. The audience grew quieter. Helen kept her eyes closed, letting herself sink into the music. The opening built slowly, climbing in intensity. This was the part she'd practiced in her apartment late at night when she thought no one could hear. The part she'd played in her head while tuning other people's pianos. It's imagining what it would be like to perform it. Now she was actually doing it. The conductor brought in the orchestra. The strings entered first, soft and searching, following her lead. Then the woodwinds joined. The music swelled, filling the hall with sound. Helen opened her eyes. The audience had stopped moving. The rustling had ceased. People sat still, leaning forward slightly. Even in the darkness beyond the lights, she could sense their attention shifting. They were listening now. She moved into the first big passage, her fingers flying across the keys. This was one of the sections she'd been worried about. Fast notes, big jumps. But her hands knew what to do. They'd done this before, thousands of times in another life. She made it through without a mistake. The first movement was a conversation between the piano and orchestra. Question and answer. Tension and release. Helen had always loved this about concertos. You weren't alone up there. You had partners in the music. The conductor's eyes met hers during a brief pause. He smiled. He could tell she was finding her rhythm. But then Helen saw something that made her heart skip. In the front row, a woman in an emerald dress was writing in a small notebook. A critic. Helen recognized her from photos in the music magazines. She was one of the toughest reviewers in New York, known for absolutely destroying performances she found lacking. Helen's fingers stumbled. Just slightly, barely noticeable. But she felt it. Don't think about her. Don't think about any of them. She pulled her focus back to the music, to the conversation happening between her hands and the piano. Nothing else mattered. Not the critic, not the people who'd left, not the fact that she was a 52-year-old piano tuner who had no business being on this stage. The music mattered. That was all. The first movement built to its climax. Big, powerful chords. The orchestra surging behind her. Helen put everything into it. All the years of quiet longing, all the dreams she'd packed away, all the times she'd sat in this building and wondered what if. The movement ended with a dramatic flourish. As the sound faded, there was supposed to be silence before the second movement began. A moment of stillness. But something unexpected happened. Someone started clapping. Just one person at first, breaking the concert hall rule of not applauding between movements. Then another person joined in. Then more. A wave of applause rolled through the audience. Helen sat at the piano, stunned. The conductor looked equally surprised. People didn't usually applaud between movements of a concerto. It wasn't done. But the audience didn't seem to care about the rules. They were applauding her, the critic in the front. Rowe had stopped writing. She was clapping too, a small smile on her face. The applause died down after a few seconds, and the hall fell silent again. Helen's eyes were wet. She blinked rapidly, trying to clear her vision. She couldn't fall apart now. She still had 2 movements to go. The conductor gave her a moment to collect herself, then raised his baton for the second movement. Helen placed her hands on the keys again. But this time, something was different. The fear was gone. She wasn't playing for them anymore. She was playing for herself, for her father, for the girl she used to be and the woman she'd become. She was playing because this was who she'd always been. Underneath everything else, and for the first time in 25 years, that felt like more than enough. The second movement began with the orchestra. Soft strings, like a whisper in the darkness. Helen waited for her entrance, counting the measures in her head. When her moment came, she played with the tenderness she didn't know she still had. This movement was different from the first, quieter, more intimate. If the first movement was about power and drama, this one was about vulnerability and hope. The melody floated above the orchestra like a conversation between old friends. Helen's hands moved gently across the keys. No force needed here. Just touch. Just feeling. She thought about all the people she'd loved. Her mother gone too soon. Her father, who'd sacrificed so much to give her music lessons. Her siblings, who'd grown into good people despite losing their parents young. The music seemed to say all the things she'd never been able to put into words. The gratitude, the grief, the quiet acceptance of how life unfolds in ways we never expect. In the audience, Helen noticed something. People had stopped checking their phones. No one was shifting in their seats. The usual small distractions of a concert had disappeared. Everyone was listening, really listening. She could feel the audience breathing with her. When she played a delicate phrase, they seemed to hold their breath. When the melody soared, she felt them lean in. This was what she'd forgotten about performing. It wasn't about showing off technical skill. It was about creating a shared moment, a connection between the person playing and the people listening. The strings swelled behind her, and Helen answered with a cascade of notes that descended like gentle rain. Her fingers knew exactly where to go. The calluses on her hands, the ones she'd been so worried about, didn't matter. If anything, they gave her a different kind of strength. She glanced toward the wings and caught sight of 2 figures standing there. Her sister and brother. They'd made it. Her sister was crying, one hand pressed to her mouth. Her brother had his arm around her shoulders. Both of them were watching Helen like they'd never seen her before. Maybe they hadn't. Maybe this version of her, the one who'd existed before she became their caretaker, was someone they'd only heard about in stories. Helen smiled just slightly and turned back to the piano. The second movement came to a close with a simple, beautiful phrase. The last notes hung in the air for a moment, then faded to silence. This time, the audience knew not to clap. They stayed quiet, waiting for the third movement. But Helen needed a moment. She lifted her hands from the keys and took a breath. The conductor waited patiently. He understood. This was her journey, and he was just there to support her. She looked out at the audience again. She could see their faces now, her eyes having adjusted to the lights. An elderly couple in the third row holding hands. A young woman with tears on her cheeks. A man in a suit who'd been checking his watch earlier but was now completely focused on the stage. They were with her. All of them. The third movement was the challenge. The finale. Fast, energetic, demanding. This was where her technique would either hold up or fail. Her hands would have to move faster than they had in 25 years. She'd have to trust that the muscle memory was strong enough. The conductor raised his baton. Helen positioned her hands over the keys. The movement exploded into life. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, racing through passages she'd practiced until her hands ached all those years ago. The notes came rapid fire, a cascade of sound that built and built. The orchestra charged forward with her, matching her energy. This was the moment she'd been most afraid of. But fear had turned into something else. Exhilaration. Joy. The pure thrill of playing music at full speed. Full intensity, holding nothing back. There was a particularly difficult section coming up. A series of jumps and runs that required perfect precision. Helen had stumbled over it during practice. As it approached, she felt a flicker of doubt. Then she remembered something her father used to tell her. Don't think about the notes. Feel the music. Let your hands dance. She let go. Stopped trying to control every movement. Just let her hands dance across the keys. She made it through perfectly. The audience was invisible to her now. The concert hall itself seemed to disappear. There was only the music, flowing through her like electricity. Every neuron firing, every sense alive. This was what she'd been missing all these years. Not the applause or the recognition, this feeling, this absolute presence in the moment. The orchestra raced alongside her. The conductor's movements became bigger, more animated. He was caught up in it too. Everyone was. Helen's hands were starting to tire. 25 years away from this kind of playing was showing. Her forearms burned. Her fingers felt heavy. But she pushed through. The end was in sight. The music built to a frenzy, faster and faster. The entire orchestra, at full volume now. Helen matched them, pouring everything she had left into these final measures. And then came the last chord. The big, triumphant finish that Rachmaninoff was famous for. Helen's hands came down on the keys with every ounce of strength she had. The sound filled Carnegie Hall like a sonic boom. She held the chord, sustaining it as the orchestra played their final notes. The conductor's arms were raised high, his baton pointing toward the ceiling. Then he brought his arms down sharply. Cutting off the sound, silence. For one heartbeat, 2 heartbeats. The hall was completely still. Then the audience exploded. The sound of their applause hit Helen like a wave. She sat at the piano, breathing hard, her hands still on the keys. She couldn't quite believe it was over, that she'd actually done it. People were standing. Not just a few people. Everyone, the entire audience, rose to their feet as one. The applause was deafening. It echoed off the walls, bounced off the ceiling, surrounded her from all sides. Helen stood up on shaky legs and turned to face them. The lights were bright in her eyes, but she could see the smiles, the enthusiasm. These people who'd been skeptical 20 minutes ago were now clapping so hard their hands must have hurt. The conductor walked over and embraced her. That was extraordinary, he said in her ear, his voice full of genuine warmth. Truly extraordinary. The orchestra members were on their feet too, clapping. The first violinist was beaming. The cellist nodded at her with respect. Helen's eyes found her siblings in the wings. Her sister was sobbing now, happy tears streaming down her face. Her brother gave her a thumbs up, grinning like crazy. The applause continued. 1 minute. 2 minutes. 3. Helen bowed, feeling awkward and overwhelmed. She wasn't used to this. She'd spent so long being invisible, being the person no one noticed. Now all these eyes were on her, all this appreciation directed at her. The critic in the front row was standing too. She'd stopped taking notes. She was just clapping, a look of genuine surprise on her face. Helen bowed again. The audience kept clapping. Someone in the balcony shouted, "Bravo!" Others joined in. The traditional calls of appreciation usually reserved for the greatest performers. Helen felt tears sliding down her cheeks. She didn't bother wiping them away. Let them see. Let them know that this meant something to her. That it wasn't just another performance for some seasoned professional. This was a woman getting back a piece of herself. She thought was gone forever. The manager appeared from the wings carrying a bouquet of roses. He walked onto the stage and presented them to Helen. She took them, buried her face in the flowers for a moment. They smelled like spring, like new beginnings. She looked out at the audience one more time. These strangers who'd given her a chance, who'd listened with open hearts, who were celebrating not just the music, but the journey that had brought her to this moment. The applause continued for 7 minutes total. 7 minutes of standing ovation. 7 minutes of validation for every sacrifice, every quiet moment of doubt. Every time she'd wondered if she'd made the wrong choice all those years ago. Finally, the applause began to fade. People started sitting down, gathering their things. But the energy in the room had changed. Helen could feel it. Something special had happened here tonight. Something none of them would forget as she walked off stage. Her legs trembling with exhaustion and emotion, Helen realized something important. She hadn't performed to prove she was good enough. She hadn't played to show anyone what they'd been missing. She'd played because the music needed to be heard. And somewhere along the way, she'd remembered that she needed to play it. That made all the difference. The green room backstage was small and quiet. Helen sat on the old sofa, still holding the bouquet of roses. Her hands were shaking again, but this time it wasn't from fear. It was adrenaline. Pure, overwhelming adrenaline. Her sister burst through the door and threw her arms around Helen's neck. That was incredible. I can't believe you never told us you could play like that. I used to play like that, Helen said, her voice hoarse. A long time ago? No. Her brother stepped into the room, shaking his head. You play like that now. What we just saw, that wasn't the past. That was you, right now, today. Lynn looked down at her hands. The same hands that had adjusted piano strings that morning. The same hands that had made breakfast and washed dishes and done 1,000 ordinary things. Somehow those hands had just played Rachmaninoff at Carnegie Hall. There was a knock on the door. The manager poked his head in. Sorry to interrupt. There are some people who'd like to meet you. If you're up for it, Helen's eyes widened. People. Critics, musicians, some audience members. They're asking about you. He paused. No pressure. I can send them away if you want. Her sister squeezed her hand. It's up to you. Helen thought about it. Part of her wanted to slip out the back door and go home. Return to her normal life where nobody knew her name. But another part, a part that had been silent for too long, was curious. Okay, she said. Give me a minute. She stood and looked at herself in the mirror on the wall. Her makeup was smudged from tears. Her hair was messier than when she'd started. She looked exhausted and overwhelmed and completely unlike a concert pianist. She looked like herself. I'm ready, she told the manager. He opened the door wider, and the critic from the front row walked in. Up close, she looked older than her photos, with kind eyes and silver hair pulled back in a neat bun. I had to meet you, the critic said, extending her hand. I'm Patricia Chen. I've been reviewing concerts in this city for 30 years, and I've never seen anything quite like what happened out there tonight. Helen shook her hand, feeling overwhelmed. I'm just a piano tuner. I wasn't supposed to be performing tonight. I know. The manager told me the story. That makes it even more remarkable. Patricia pulled out her notebook. Would you mind if I asked you a few questions? For my review? I don't know if I'm ready for that, Helen admitted. Then just listen, Patricia said gently. She flipped through her notes. I've heard Rachmaninoff's second piano concerto performed by some of the greatest pianists alive. Technically, some of them were more perfect than what you played tonight. But perfection isn't everything. What you gave us was something else entirely. Authenticity. Heart. Every note felt like it meant something to you personally. Helen's eyes filled with tears again. It did. It does. That's what made it special. That's what made people stop looking at their phones and really listen. You reminded us why we love music in the first place. After Patricia left, more people came. A young pianist who said Helen's performance inspired her. An elderly man who said he'd been coming to Carnegie Hall for 40 years, and this was one of the most moving concerts he'd ever attended. A music teacher who wanted to tell her students about what happened tonight, Each conversation felt surreal. These people were talking about her performance like it was something important, something that mattered. Around 11 o'clock, the crowd finally thinned out. Helen's siblings had gone to bring the car around. She was gathering her things when the conductor found her. "I wanted to catch you before you left," he said. "I conduct orchestras all over the world. I work with famous soloists, people whose names everyone knows. But what you did tonight was special." The orchestra felt it too. "We were all lifted by your performance." "Thank you," Helen managed to say. "Thank you for being patient with me." "I didn't have to be patient. You knew exactly what you were doing." He handed her a business card. "If you ever want to perform again, call me. I'd be honored to work with you." Helen stared at the card. A year ago, even a week ago, she would have laughed at the idea. Now she tucked it carefully into her purse. The drive home was quiet. Her sister drove while her brother sat in the back with Helen. Nobody said much. They were all processing what had happened. When they pulled up to Helen's apartment building, her brother finally spoke. "We never thanked you properly." "For what you gave up for us, you don't need to thank me," Helen said. "Yes, we do. You had all this talent, all this potential, and you put it aside to take care of us. We were kids. We didn't understand what that cost you. It didn't cost me anything. You two were worth it." Her sister turned around in the driver's seat, tears in her eyes. "But tonight, we saw what the world missed all these years. And we're so sorry you had to wait this long to share it again." Helen hugged them both. "Don't be sorry. Tonight happened exactly when it was supposed to happen. If I'd performed at 27, I would have been a different person, a different musician. Everything I've lived through, everything I've learned, all the years of working with pianos and supporting you two, it all went into what I played tonight." She realized as she said it that it was true. The performance wasn't good despite the 25-year gap. It was good because of it. All that life experience, all that quiet dedication, all that love she'd poured into taking care of her family had deepened her understanding of the music. Inside her apartment,
Helen
made tea and sat by the window. The city was still alive below, lights twinkling, people going about their lives. Somewhere out there, Patricia Chen was probably writing her review. The audience members were going home, maybe telling their families about the unexpected performance they'd witnessed. Helen's phone buzzed. A text from a number she didn't recognize. "This is the hall manager. Just wanted you to know the box office has been flooded with calls. People asking when you're performing next. Think about it." She set the phone down and picked up the conductor's business card. She turned it over in her hands, feeling the weight of possibility. For 25 years, she'd told herself that chapter of her life was closed, that she'd made her choice and had to live with it. But tonight proved something important. Chapters don't close. They pause. And sometimes, when you least expect it, the story continues. Helen thought about her father. She imagined him in the audience tonight, in his usual spot in the back row, wearing that huge smile. She'd played for him tonight even though he wasn't there to hear it. In a way, she'd been playing for him all along. Through all those years of quiet work and sacrifice, she thought about the piano sitting in the basement of Carnegie Hall right now. The one she'd tuned just yesterday. The one that had felt like an extension of herself tonight. She'd spent years taking care of other people's instruments, making sure they could share their music with the world. Maybe it was time to take care of her own music too. The next morning, Helen called the manager. "About those calls you mentioned," she said. "I might be interested in performing again. Not right away. I need time to prepare properly. But maybe in a few months." She could hear the smile in his voice. "We'll make it happen. I'll start looking at dates." Helen hung up and looked at her calendar. She had piano tuning appointments scheduled for the whole week. Regular work. The kind of steady, reliable work that had sustained her for decades. She wasn't giving that up. She liked her work. She was good at it. It grounded her. But now there would be something else too. A balance between the technical and the artistic. Between taking care of other people's music and sharing her own, her sister found her at the kitchen table, staring at the conductor's business card. You're going to do it, aren't you? Perform again? Helen nodded slowly. I think I am. Is that crazy? No crazier than what you did last night. Her sister sat down across from her. For the record, I think it's wonderful. You've spent your whole adult life helping other people. It's time you did something for yourself. But I'm 52. I'm not young anymore. I'm not fresh out of school with my whole career ahead of me. So what? Last night proved that age doesn't matter. Timing doesn't matter. What matters is that you have something to say through your music, and people want to hear it. Helen smiled. She picked up her phone and looked at the texts that had come in overnight. Friends she hadn't heard from in years who'd somehow heard about the performance. Former colleagues from her brief time at Juilliard. Even a message from one of her old professors, who'd been in the audience by coincidence. Each message said basically the same thing. Welcome back. Helen hadn't realized how much she'd missed being seen. Not as a piano tuner, not as someone's sister or daughter or caretaker, but as herself, as a musician, as someone who had something valuable to offer the world. She spent the morning responding to messages and making plans. In the afternoon, she had a piano to tune across town. Normal work, normal life. But as she packed up her tools and headed out the door, Helen felt different, lighter, like she'd been carrying something heavy for 25 years and had finally set it down. The dream hadn't died. It had just been waiting, and now, finally, it was time to wake up.